A nurse working the night shift at the Crescent Hotel once refused to finish her rounds on the 4th floor. She wouldn't say why. She just clocked out and never came back. That was in the 1930s, when the building wasn't a hotel at all, but a hospital run by a man named Norman Baker, who promised to cure cancer with methods no licensed physician would touch. Patients came from across the country, desperate and out of options. Many of them never left. Arkansas doesn't advertise this part of itself. The tourism boards show waterfalls, hot springs, and mountain overlooks. But underneath the postcard version of the state is another map entirely, one drawn by the people who live there. Ask a local in Eureka Springs, in Gurdon, in the Ozark backcountry, and they'll tell you which roads to avoid once the sun goes down. Not because of ghost stories they read online, because of something they, or someone they trust, experience firsthand. This is a tour through 11 of those places. Some are buildings, some are stretches of forest. One is a railroad track that no longer exists but still, according to the people who live nearby, makes its presence known. We start with the Crescent, because it's the closest thing Arkansas has to a haunted landmark that outsiders have actually heard of. What most visitors don't realize is that the hotel's reputation didn't come from folklore first. It came from a federal investigation. Baker was eventually convicted of mail fraud in 1940. After regulators discovered he had been treating cancer patients with a concoction of watermelon seed, brown corn silk, and alcohol, while their conditions worsened. Autopsy photographs and patient records were later found sealed inside the hotel's walls during a renovation. That detail alone would be disturbing enough. But staff still report cold spots on the 4th floor, doors that lock from the inside, and a recurring smell of formaldehyde in a building that hasn't stored embalming fluid in nearly a century. That should have been the strangest story in the state. It isn't even close. 90 minutes south, in the small town of Gurdon, there's a set of old railroad tracks where, for over 100 years, people have reported a floating light moving down the line at night. The Gurdon light has been investigated by television crews, physicists, and skeptics who each arrived with a theory: swamp gas, refracted headlights, static electricity from quartz deposits in the ground. None of them have fully explained what witnesses describe: a light that approaches, retreats, and occasionally splits in two. The most common local explanation is older and darker. In 1931, a railroad worker named Louis McBride was murdered on those tracks, his body found beaten and left beside the rails he used to walk each night. Locals will tell you the light is Louis, still making his rounds. Investigators will tell you the geology of the area does produce unusual atmospheric conditions. Both things, it turns out, can be true at once, and neither one has stopped people from driving out there at 2 a.m. hoping and dreading that they'll see it. The deeper you get into Arkansas's rural interior, the less these stories rely on ghosts and the more they rely on geography itself turning against you. Take the Ozark National Forest, specifically the stretch of wilderness locals call the Devil's Den backcountry. On paper, it's a state park with hiking trails and a CCC-built lodge from the 1930s. But long before the park existed, this same terrain was known for its caves, sinkholes, and a labyrinth of underground passages that early settlers refused to map. Search and rescue teams still treat certain trail sections as high risk, not for supernatural reasons, but because the karst topography, soft limestone riddled with hidden caverns, has swallowed hikers whole. The ground here doesn't just feel unstable. It sometimes is. That physical unpredictability is what makes the next chapter of this story so unsettling. Because in 2010, geography and tragedy collided in a way no one saw coming. The Albert Pike Recreation Area, nestled along the Little Missouri River, was considered one of the safest, most scenic campgrounds in the Ouachita Mountains. Families had camped there for generations. Then, in the early morning hours of June 11th, a flash flood, fed by nearly 8 inches of rain falling in just a few hours upstream, sent a wall of water through the campground while most visitors were asleep in their tents. 20 people died that night. Survivors described a sound like a freight train arriving out of nowhere, no warning, no time to climb to higher ground. The campground was permanently closed afterward. Today, the access roads remain gated, and locals who once camped there as children won't return, even during the day. It isn't a ghost story. It's simpler than that. Some places absorb a tragedy so completely that people can't separate the land from what happened on it. That inability to separate place from memory shows up again and again across the state, and nowhere more visibly than in Hot Springs, where an entire abandoned resort has been left to decay in plain sight. The majestic hotel once hosted gangsters, politicians, and Hollywood stars drawn to the city's therapeutic bathhouses. By the time it closed in 2006, it had become a shell of that legacy, and in 2014, an electrical fire tore through the structure, gutting it in hours. What's left now is a blackened skeleton of a building sitting in the middle of downtown, fenced off but never fully torn down, caught in a decade-long dispute over demolition and preservation. Locals walk past it daily. Almost none of them go near it after dark. Not because of what might be inside, because of what obviously already happened there, visible from the sidewalk, unresolved for years. Not every location on this list carries such a clear historical wound. Some are stranger precisely because no one can agree on what happened at all. Near the small community of Zinc, in Boone County, there's a stretch of road locals call Devil's Promenade, though most maps don't label it that way. For decades, residents have reported strange lights, the sensation of being watched, and cattle mutilations that local sheriffs investigated but never explained. Similar reports cluster around Petit Jean Mountain, where hikers describe disorientation on trails they've walked dozens of times before, and around the Toltec Mounds, ancient earthworks built by indigenous peoples centuries before European settlers arrive, where archaeologists have documented ceremonial burial practices that modern visitors still describe as leaving them, in their words, unable to shake the feeling that they were being observed the entire time they were on site. None of these places share a single origin story. What they share is a pattern. Something happens. It resists explanation. And instead of fading, the story sharpens with each retelling, until the place itself becomes inseparable from the fear. There's a version of this list that would try to tie all 11 locations together with one grand unifying theory: ley lines, cursed land, restless spirits demanding recognition. That version would be more satisfying. It would also be dishonest. The truth is messier. A hotel became a crime scene because one man exploited desperate, dying patients. A railroad track became a legend because a murder was never fully resolved. A campground became forbidden ground because a river rose faster than anyone could react to. What connects these places isn't a supernatural thread. It's the simple, uncomfortable fact that Arkansas's landscape has absorbed more human suffering, more unresolved violence, and more unexplainable moments than its tourism brochures will ever admit. Locals don't avoid these places because they are certain something supernatural waits there. They avoid them because they've learned, generation after generation, that some locations don't let go of what happened inside them. The fear isn't really about ghosts. It's about memory, embedded so deeply in soil and stone that the line between history and haunting stops mattering. Whether or not you believe the Golden Light is a murdered railroad worker still walking his line, one fact remains undisputed by skeptics and believers alike. People are still driving out there, decades later, standing in the dark, waiting to see if it's true. Maybe that's the real story here. Not whether these places are haunted, but why, after all this time, we still can't stop looking. Thanks for watching this video. Consider liking it and subscribing to our channel for more such videos. Thank you.